They mocked his gentle sculptor's hands, until he broke their commander in half. Steel and charged air bit at Ethan's senses as he stood before the emerald seat, the lone human among a host of towering, armored Zevran. The hall of the Valkyrie was a fortress of cold splendor, each surface a testament to power, not grace. Spires stabbed upward like claws, pillars jutted like pikes, casting fractured shadows across the marble floor. Ethan kept his slender fingers interlaced behind him, posture straight, eyes trained on the Empress but never quite meeting her gaze. Beneath his composed expression, anxiety buzzed like static. Ambassador Rowan's voice was steady, ringing through the silence as she delivered humanity's plea for unity. "We come with open hands, Empress. The Accord offers knowledge, alliance, the promise of peace." "Peace?" The Empress's lips curled. "Or weakness, Ambassador Rowan?" Her gaze swept the delegation. Her Zevran council, their obsidian armor gleaming, stood in silent ranks. "You ask for unity. What do you offer in return?" Rowan held her ground. "We offer what all kinfolk do: perspective, invention, art." The Empress's hand fell, a jeweled gauntlet glinting. "Art? Your ideals are feeble, your bodies slight. What strength have you to stand in our ranks?" Her voice was thunder rolling through the hall, scattering hope like leaves. Ethan's attention drifted, seeking an anchor in the storm. There, Captain Silith, sentinel to the Empress, watched him with luminous, unblinking eyes. Her skin was a vivid green, her hair a cascade of deep red, ears elegantly pointed, jaw tight with disdain. Her battle harness wrapped her frame in obsidian plates, every line designed for both intimidation and speed. To her, Ethan's unblemished hands bespoke only fragility, useless in the forge of Zevran's strength. Ambassador Rowan's protest was crisp, but it never reached the end. The Empress's voice sliced through it, sharp and final. "Enough. The trial of worth will decide if you stand beside us or kneel." A hush fell as her words echoed, the challenge unmistakable. A shiver rippled through the Accord delegation. The AI embedded in Rowan's comm scanned the room, invisible pulses leaping from Zevran to human, seeking anyone with combat proficiency. It spoke in Rowan's ear, cool and certain. "Candidate identified, Ethan Hale." Laughter bloomed among the Zevran. It was not cruel, but it was certain. Certainty in their bones that this human, this artist, would fail. Ethan caught Silith's gaze, her lips twisting, green eyes hard as emerald. Humiliation surged in his chest, then settled into a strange, familiar stillness. A calm that always came before he pressed chisel to stone. Training began at dawn. Silith led, her every movement a study in lethal precision. The Skarn fighting style was a language of ferocity, all feline agility and coiled strength. In the hall's practice chamber, light slanted through the ribs of the ceiling, glinting off her armor as she struck, spun, fell into perfect defensive stances. Ethan watched, not as a warrior, but as an artist. He catalogued the flow of Silith's muscles, the way her weight shifted, how the harness flexed and held. His mind sketched curves, angles, fault lines. When she finished, she turned to him, voice clipped. "You stare as if you'd carve me in marble." He met her glare with quiet candor. "I study what endures, and what breaks." She tossed him a practice blade. He let it drop, examining instead the armor racks, the anatomical diagrams projected on the wall. "I need your permission to access structural blueprints," he said. "The harnesses, not the weapons." Silith scoffed, crossing her arms. "You prepare for a sculpture, not a fight. You will not last a minute." Ethan's smile was faint. Sculpture and battle both begin with observation. Days passed. The hall became a crucible. Ethan surrounded himself with projections, schematics of Zevran anatomy, diagrams of armor composition, virtual overlays charting lines of force and fracture. He moved among alloys, fingers brushing textures, eyes tracking seams and joints. He asked questions no warrior ever had. Where did pressure build? Where did the material flex? How did a Zevran turn, fall, break? Syleth's contempt was constant but grudging. She watched as he charted weaknesses with a sculptor's intuition, mapping not just the armor, but the movements within. Her words were sharp, but a flicker of curiosity betrayed her. "Are you afraid?" she asked one evening as they stood alone in the practice hall, the clangor of training fading around them. Ethan shrugged. "Fear is a tool, so is understanding." The night before the first bout, the hall was quiet. Shadows stretched long and blue. Ethan stood before a rack of armor, the Zevran pieces looming over him, heavy and cumbersome. He shook his head, pushing them aside. Syleth intercepted him in the corridor, blocking his path with emotions swift as breath. Her voice was edged with something new, not scorn, but a reluctant respect. "You refuse the armor?" Ethan nodded. "It restricts my movement. I'll be faster without it, even if I'm more exposed." She studied him, eyes narrowed. "At least fall with dignity, human." He met her gaze, voice soft but steady. "Dignity is for those who can afford it. I'm just searching for the cracks in the stone." A beat of silence passed between them, tension taut as wire. Then Syleth stepped aside, her expression unreadable. Ethan walked on, heart pounding not with fear, but with the certainty of a sculptor ready to strike the first blow. The arena roared with anticipation, a living wall of sound pressing against Ethan's skin as he stepped onto the sand-flecked platform. Zevran banners hung from jagged balconies, their sigils flickering in the charged air. Ethan's heartbeat was a steady drum beneath his ribs, his hands loose at his sides as he faced his first opponent, a six-limbed Zevran brute, each muscle corded and gleaming beneath battered armor. The giant flexed, four arms outstretched, two curling into fists the size of Ethan's skull. The crowd jeered, voices crashing together in a tide of derision and bloodlust. The signal blared, an ancient klaxon, guttural and raw. The Zevran titan lunged, sand exploding beneath his feet as he drove forward with inhuman speed. Ethan moved sideways, slipping past the first blow, his focus narrowing to the brute's stance, not his face. The Zevran's feet thundered across the arena floor. Ethan's eyes followed the lines of movement, the way the weight shifted. On the left, the brute was sure. On the right, there, a subtle falter, the ankle rolling just a shade too far. It was a flaw he recognized, one he had seen in the fractured armor samples Syleth had tossed aside in the training hall. The Zevran spun, bellowing. Ethan ducked a wild swing, breath cool in his lungs, mind working in shapes and vectors. The crowd's jeers twisted, now spiked with something sharper, a flicker of surprise as the human kept moving, kept standing. The brute charged a second time, limbs lashing. Ethan backpedaled, baiting him into overcommitting, letting the Zevran's own weight betray him. On the third rush, Ethan acted. He stepped in, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the giant's body, and drove his heel down in a precise arc against the weak joint. The sound was sharp, a crack and splinter as armor gave way. The Zevran collapsed with a howl, all six limbs sprawling in the sand. Silence crashed down, abrupt and absolute. For a moment, even the wind held its breath. Ethan stood over his opponent, chest rising and falling with careful control, gaze steady. On the balcony above, Syleth's eyes widened. Surprise flickered across her features, the skepticism carved deep in her jawline fracturing. She leaned forward, lips parted as she watched Ethan return to the Accord's side. The crowd now stunned into awed whispers. Training shifted after that. Syleth's posture softened, curiosity blooming where disdain had once reigned. She called Ethan to the practice floor without the usual bark of command. Instead, her voice was low, almost tentative. "Show me. What did you see?" Ethan set aside the practice blade she offered. Instead, he gestured to her harness, tracing the edge of the breastplate without touching. "It's not just where you're strong, Captain. It's where stress gathers, where the armor flexes under tension, or a joint is set at a vulnerable angle." She arched a brow, skepticism warring with interest. "You see cracks no Zevran ever could?" "I see lines," he answered, moving closer. He traced with a gloved finger along the join between her shoulder and neck, careful and analytical. "Here, the plate rides up when you lift your arm. The pressure focuses right at the seam." Syleth held still, breath hitching despite herself. Ethan's touch was clinical, yet it sent a tremor through her, a strange shiver, both exposed and electric. He circled her slowly, eyes mapping the interplay between armor and skin, his fingers pausing above her hip. "This is the weakest point. If I were your enemy, I'd strike here, angle down, disable you before you could react." A flush rose along her cheeks, but she didn't step away. "And if I knew you saw it? I'd expect you to change," Ethan said quietly. "Adapt. The best sculptures are always unfinished, always in flux." Their eyes met. The air between them thickened, an unspoken tension rising with every word left unsaid. Syleth found herself searching his face, looking for the edges of the man behind the artist. Ethan's next trial arrived sooner than expected. This time his opponent was a renowned blade master, a Zevran woman with twin sabers, her movements honed and lethal. The match was brief, brutal. She pressed him hard, her blades carving arcs of silver light, drawing blood with shallow cuts along his forearm and side. Ethan absorbed the pain, moving with a sculptor's patience, watching the flow of her attacks, waiting for the moment when her rhythm would break. Then, swift as a sculptor's chisel, he struck, a surgical blow to the side of her throat. She crumpled, sabers clattering to the sand. The arena's silence was even deeper this time, laced with something like fear. Ethan bowed his head, withdrawing into himself as medics rushed to tend to his fallen opponent. That night, as darkness pressed against the fortress walls and the hall of the Varkari slept, Syleth found Ethan alone in his makeshift studio. Light from a single hololamp threw shadows across his face as he worked a block of alloy with deft, silent hands. She hesitated in the doorway, watching the concentration that furrowed his brow, the gentle motion of thumb and forefinger smoothing the metal's edge. "You move like you've broken more than you've built," Syleth said, her voice hushed, almost vulnerable. Ethan didn't look up at first. "I was taught both," he replied, setting aside the chisel. "Come in." She stepped into the circle of lamplight, searching his face. "Who taught you?" He met her gaze, weary but unguarded. "The Guild of Form, on Varkar 5. They train those who shape and those who destroy. To them, every being is clay, something to be molded or shattered if it stands in the way. I learned to see people in terms of composition, weakness, potential." Syleth's breath caught, unsettled. "You see me like that? As a set of flaws and lines?" Ethan shook his head. "No. I see what you could be, what anyone could. I sculpt to atone for what I was taught. To remember that creation is a choice, destruction comes easier." She moved closer, the tension between them taut. "You make it sound as if you're more dangerous with your hands than any Zevran with a blade." He offered a wry, sad smile. "Sometimes I am. That's why I sculpt, to remind myself there's another way." Syleth stared at him, a mixture of fear and fascination flickering across her face. She saw him anew, not as the frail human she had dismissed, nor as the cunning observer who bested her kin, but as something more complicated, a destroyer cloaked in the guise of a creator, a contradiction she couldn't quite resolve. In the days that followed, their sessions shifted, the balance between them changed. Syleth no longer barked orders, Instead, she asked questions, seeking to see as Ethan saw. They moved together in the practice hall, her attacks sharper, his parries more intuitive. He would pause, adjusting her stance, his touch both instructive and gentle. She challenged him, demanded he explain the mechanics of his observations, sometimes bristling, sometimes laughing, a sound Ethan found himself craving. When he showed her how to read the stress in her own armor, guiding her hand along the lines of force, her fingers trembled against his. "It's not so different from learning to fight," she admitted one evening. "You're just reading the body instead of the blade." "And you're learning to see with more than your eyes," Ethan replied, his voice low. Their sessions became a dance, challenge and revelation, question and answer, each encounter drawing them closer. Silith's fascination deepened, mingling with something she did not name, even to herself. The arena's roar faded into memory, replaced by the quiet intensity of their shared space. There, beneath the cold splendor of the Varkari fortress, something fragile and dangerous began to grow. The penultimate match was savage from the instant Ethan stepped onto the arena's grit-strewn floor. The air thrummed, heavy with anticipation and the metallic tang of old blood. His opponent was already waiting, tall, lean, and coiled like a spring, twin blades flashing at his hips. Unlike the previous combatants, this Zevran assassin moved with a ghost's precision, his armor tight to his form, eyes cold with predatory calculation. The crowd sensed the danger and pressed closer, their jeers edged with excitement and something darker. Ethan rolled his shoulder, testing the lingering ache from his last bout. His gaze was steady, his stance relaxed, but every nerve hummed with readiness. He watched as the assassin circled, barely disturbing the sand, feet gliding in smooth arcs. For a heartbeat, everything narrowed to the space between them. The assassin's left blade angled back, the right drawn for a feint. Ethan measured the tension, reading the assassin as he would the fault lines in marble. The signal sounded, shrill and final. The assassin struck first, a blur of motion, twin blades seeking Ethan's throat and gut in a single whiplash attack. Ethan twisted aside, but not before the right blade kissed his side, cutting deep. Pain lanced through him, hot and immediate, blood welling beneath his shirt. He sucked in a breath, letting the pain anchor him, eyes locked on the Zevran's shoulders, the subtle telegraph of the next strike. He retreated, steps light, giving ground as the assassin pressed, relentless. Metal flashed again. This time, Ethan parried with his forearm, and steel bit flesh. Blood slid down to his palm, red against the pale skin. The crowd roared at the sight, sensing weakness, but Ethan's gaze remained clear, mind cold and assessing. Every wound was a lesson, every movement a line in an invisible sketch. He watched for the moment when the Zevran's rhythm would break. Above, in the shadowed gallery, Silith gripped the stone rail, knuckles blanching. She felt every blow as if it landed on her own body. The urge to intervene, to leap down and shield Ethan, was a living thing in her chest, a protective instinct she could no longer deny or dismiss. His stubborn composure stoked something fierce within her, mingling fear and pride in equal measure. The assassin feinted left, then spun, both blades whistling in a scissor arc. Ethan ducked, pain flaring in his side, and caught the Zevran's knee with his own, staggering him. For a split second, their faces were inches apart, the assassin's breath hot and sour, eyes wide with surprise that the human had survived so long. Ethan saw the minute shift in weight, the way the left shoulder tensed in preparation for a killing blow. He made his choice. As the blade flashed toward his face, Ethan turned into it, allowing the point to drive into his shoulder. Pain exploded white behind his eyes, but he seized the opportunity. His uninjured arm snaked around the Zevran's wrist, locking the assassin's blade and arm against his own dislocated joint. The Zevran wrenched back, but Ethan held fast, jaw clenched against the agony. With a savage twist, Ethan used his body as leverage, driving the Zevran's elbow against the edge of his own collarbone. The joint gave with a sickening crack. The assassin screamed, his arm folding at an unnatural angle, both blades falling from limp fingers. Ethan released him, and with a gasp, drove his back against the arena wall, snapping his own shoulder back into its socket. The pain was blinding, but when he looked up, his eyes found Silith's across the crowd. A silent question, a plea for strength, or perhaps just proof that he was still alive. The crowd was stunned, the silence complete save for the harsh breathing of the defeated assassin. Ethan stood swaying, blood darkening his tunic, his control as precise as ever. Silith stared down at him, her heart in her throat. In his agony and composure, she saw the full depth of his discipline, the strange, terrible beauty of his control. And within herself, something broke, her defenses faltering in the wake of a feeling she could no longer hide. After the medics had carried the assassin away, and the crowd's shock had given way to a new, uncertain respect, the arena fell quiet. Night bled into the fortress, softening the hard lines of stone and steel. Ethan retreated to his workshop, moving slowly, each step measured, his battered body crying out for rest. He was bent over a basin, cleaning the blood from his side, when Silith entered. She wore no armor, only a simple wrap of midnight blue, her hair unbound, her eyes shadowed with worry. The air between them changed instantly. No longer the charged field of teacher and student, but something far more fragile. Ethan straightened, winced, and gave a ghost of a smile. "You should be resting," he said, voice rough. Silith shook her head. "I could say the same. You look worse than usual." A laugh escaped him, brief and genuine. "Thank you, Captain." She closed the door behind her, lingering in the hush. Vulnerability flickered in her posture, as if she might vanish with the wrong word. "Ethan," she said, crossing to him, "I'm afraid. Not for myself, for you, and for my mother." He wiped his hands, then reached for hers. She let him take them, the calluses on her palms rough against the warmth of his touch. He held her gently, thumbs tracing the web of scars and lifelines. "Your mother is formidable," he said. "But so are you." Silith swallowed. "You know she will not hold back. No matter what's passed between us, you are still the outsider, the challenger. If she kills you—" Her voice broke, raw. "If she kills you, I am not sure I will forgive her. Or myself." Ethan brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "If I fall, I do so by my own choice. I knew what this would cost." Her eyes shone, fierce and uncertain. "I wish you hadn't come here. I wish you had stayed a sculptor, far away from this war." He smiled, softer now. "If I hadn't come, I would never have met you." The confession hovered between them, a fragile thing. Salith stepped closer, her arms trembling as she reached up, fingertips brushing the blood-stained fabric at his shoulder. He covered her hand with his own, anchoring her touch. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "I'm alive," he whispered back. She searched his face as if memorizing every line, every scar. "I wish I could protect you," she said, voice cracking. Ethan's hand slid to her jaw, gentle as a sigh. "You do, Silith. Every time you look at me, like I'm not already broken." She leaned into his touch, eyes fluttering shut. "I don't want you to face her alone." "I won't," Ethan said. "Not really." They stood there quiet, wrapped in the hush of the workshop. No words for what passed between them, just the warmth of her body, the steadiness of his touch, the promise silent but absolute. Tomorrow would bring the final contest. Tonight, they faced the darkness together, hearts beating in the same fragile hope. The arena was hushed, every voice stolen by anticipation as Ethan stepped into the center ring. A pale shaft of light cast long shadows, cutting the silence into razor edges. Across from him stood Commander Lyra, legend of Zevran campaigns and matriarch of a dynasty. Silith's mother, her presence at once regal and terrifying. The crowd watched with reverence, Zevran young and old silent as stone, as if bearing witness to something sacred. Lyra's armor gleamed, custom forged and scarred by decades of battle. Her emerald eyes were cool and unyielding, the lines at their corners sharp with judgment. She regarded Ethan, not as a rival, but as a final test, an obstacle to be crushed, or perhaps a riddle to be solved. There was no warmth, only the weight of history pressing down upon him. The signal came, a low, ancient horn. Lyra moved first, her advance impossibly swift for one of her years, twin blades snapping out. Ethan barely brought his arms up in time. Steel glanced off his forearm, biting deep. He staggered, and Lyra followed, relentless, her blows landing with thunderous force. Ribs cracked. He felt it, a hollow drumbeat of agony beneath the flesh, and blood spattered the sand as a blade grazed his cheek, but Ethan persisted. Each strike that landed, each throb of pain, sharpened his focus. He saw her in fragments, the stiff hitch of her left hip, the protective angle of her right arm, the way her breath caught after a long combination. Her technique was ferocious, but the years had left their fingerprints. The patterns of old wounds mapped themselves across her form, as visible to Ethan as the grain in stone. He circled, gasping, sweat and blood blurring his vision. Lyra pressed forward, no hint of mercy in her eyes. "Yield," she commanded, voice cold as the steel in her hands. "You cannot win." Ethan shook his head, forcing air into bruised lungs. "Neither could the stone, until I found its fault." A flicker of respect, or perhaps irritation, crossed her face. She attacked again, feinting high and swinging low. Her blade crashed against his thigh, nearly dropping him. He caught himself on one knee, watching her hips, her feet. The rhythm faltered for just a moment as she overextended, pressing for the finish. That was the opening. Ethan surged forward, slipping inside her guard, his movements small and exact. He struck her left hip with a snap kick, right at the old injury he had seen her guard. Lyra grunted, her balance tipping. He followed with a jab to her exposed rib, feeling the give beneath armor and muscle, then a precise nerve press to her weapon arm. Her blade faltered, grip loosening. Lyra reeled, blinking in pain, confusion flaring in her gaze. Ethan seized her harness, twisting the reinforced straps around her own limb. In a single practiced motion, he immobilized her, turning her own armor into a trap. The crowd gasped as Lyra struggled, her movements suddenly awkward and confined. Ethan drew a shaky breath, summoning what little strength remained. He delivered a final, focused blow to her chest plate, a calculated strike that sent a hairline fracture through alloy and bone. Lyra fell, her knees slamming into the sand, eyes wide with shock and pride and pain. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Ethan stood over her, victorious but hollow, blood dripping from his fingers, breaths coming in short, ragged bursts. He looked down at Lyra, at the woman who had been both judge and executioner, and saw not a vanquished foe, but a monument cracked and weathered by time. The arena erupted, the Zevran voices thundering approval and disbelief. The alliance was secured, the ancient pact sealed in combat and blood. Ethan felt none of it. He moved through the crowd like a shadow, the noise distant, his victory weightless. Later, alone in his studio, the hush pressed close. The tools of his art lay abandoned, the block of stone unfinished. Ethan's hands trembled, not from pain, but from something deeper, revulsion at what he had become. He stared at his reflection in a fragment of alloy, at the blood smeared across his jaw, the haunted look in his eyes. The door creaked open, and Silith entered, her steps soft, her expression shadowed by worry. She carried a healer's kit, not a blade, her armor traded for gentle linen. For a moment she simply stood, watching him, reading the pain etched in every line of his posture. "Let me help," she said quietly, crossing to him. Ethan looked up, eyes swimming with exhaustion. "You should not have to see me like this." Syleth knelt at his side, her fingers gentle as she peeled back his torn shirt and cleaned the wounds with practiced care. "I see all of you, Ethan, the sculptor and the fighter, the man who bleeds and the man who shapes." He winced as she wrapped his ribs, the bandages soft but unyielding. "I am afraid," he admitted, voice raw. "Afraid that I am only a destroyer, that every time I touch something, I leave it broken." Salith's hands stilled, resting over his heart. "That is not true. The proof is here, in your pain, in your regret. You hurt because you are more than a weapon. Only those who care can feel the weight of what they have done." He met her gaze, searching for doubt and finding none. "If I had been born Zevran, I would have been nothing but a tool for war." She shook her head, brushing sweat from his brow. "You are not Zevran, you are Ethan, and I see the beauty in you, in the way you heal as fiercely as you fight." Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, shame and hope warring inside him. Syleth lifted his bandaged hand to her lips, pressing a kiss to the knuckles, then to the inside of his wrist, just above the pulse. He closed his eyes, letting her warmth seep through the ache. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Let yourself be human. Let yourself be loved." He opened his eyes, and she kissed him, soft, unhurried, a promise rather than a question. In that kiss, Ethan sensed the first glimmer of hope, a future built not on violence, but on acceptance and love. For the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself to believe that he could be more than what the world demanded, that together they might yet carve something beautiful from the scars. 5 years later, Ethan's atelier echoed with sunlight and the scent of stone and resin. Graceful arches soared overhead, their design a blend of Zevran geometry and human warmth. The walls were lined with sketches, armatures, blocks of marble, and rare Zevran alloys, evidence of a life spent building rather than breaking. At the heart of this space, Orion played, laughter ringing as he chased shards of color cast by the morning light. His skin shone a soft green, but his tousled hair was Ethan's, and his eyes, those luminous, shifting jewels, were Syleth's, watching the world with unguarded wonder. Ethan knelt at his workbench, shaping the curve of a wing in pale stone. His hands, once scorned as frail, now bore the calluses of years spent coaxing strength from weakness. He worked with a steady patience, every movement precise, every touch revealing hidden grace within the material. Nearby, Orion crawled among scattered tools, fingers stained with clay, occasionally pausing to peer up at his father with curiosity. The monument rising before Ethan was destined for the new academy, its form a tribute to unity. Two figures, human and Zevran, lifting a shared torch. Every chisel mark spoke of a promise kept, of the fragile peace they had carved from violence and suspicion. Footsteps echoed in the hall, light and purposeful. Syleth entered, dressed in ambassadorial robes, her bearing as regal as ever. Her hair was pulled back, her insignia gleaming, but she moved with the confidence of a woman who had found her place. She paused, taking in the scene, the sunlight, the growing monument, the child at play. A soft smile broke her usual composure. "Orion, what trouble have you made for your father today?" she teased, kneeling to gather their son into her arms. Orion giggled, reaching for a stray chisel. "He's already improved my proportions," Ethan replied, laying down his tools. "The left arm was too rigid. He fixed it with a hammer." Syleth laughed, the sound bright and infectious. "A true artist, then, or perhaps a revolutionary." Ethan stood and drew her close, arms sliding around her waist. They held each other, sharing a quiet moment as sunlight bathed them in gold. "How did the council meeting go?" he asked. She pressed her cheek to his chest, breath warm. "Better than expected. The assembly approved the commission for the monument, one to honor all students of both human and Zevran heritage. They want you to lead the design." Ethan blinked, his fingers curling at her back. "Me? Again?" "You're not just the best sculptor in the Empire, Ethan. You're its conscience." Silith leaned back, searching his face. "Besides, your method has changed everything. The way you see structure instead of relying on force. It's become the most respected martial art in the capital. Even the old guard is learning." He shook his head, smiling in disbelief. "5 years ago, they barely let me in the front gate." "5 years ago, you broke the Empress's ribs and her pride," she teased. "Some wounds heal slower than others." Orion, impatient, tugged at Silith's sleeve. "Mama, will you show me the parade?" She scooped him up, balancing him on her hip. "Of course, little spark. Your father will join us soon." Ethan watched them go, a swell of pride and longing in his chest. This life, fragile and miraculous, had been paid for in pain and stubborn hope. He turned back to the monument, running his thumb along the new arm Orion had fixed. The stone felt warm beneath his hand, full of promise. Later that day, the city thrummed with celebration. The parade of champions wound through the capital's avenues, banners snapping in the wind. Humans and Zevran marched side by side, their uniforms stitched with the new sigil of the Accord. Ethan and Silith walked at the head, Orion perched on Ethan's shoulders, waving at the crowds. But not all faces were welcoming. Along the parade route, Garrick stood, a hulking Zevran with scars etched deep into his face and tradition burning in his eyes. He wore the armor of an old campaign, its plates battered but bright, and his followers formed a silent knot of dissent behind him. As the procession neared, Garrick stepped into the street, blocking their path. The crowd stilled, a ripple of tension crackling in the air. "Ambassador Silith," Garrick called, voice carrying. "And Ethan Hale, the sculptor who unseated Commander Lyra. Some say your victory was an insult to her memory, and to our people." The gathered Zevran bristled, old wounds surfacing. Ethan felt Orion's grip tighten on his shoulders. Silith rested a steadying hand at his back. Garrick pressed on, eyes hard. "We honor the new order, but must we forget the old? My commander, your mother, should be remembered as more than a stepping stone to human glory." Ethan's jaw clenched, memories flashing. The pain of battle, the aftermath of victory, the haunted look in Lyra's eyes as she fell. He opened his mouth, but Silith's voice cut through the hush, calm and commanding. "You are right, Garrick," she said, stepping forward, her bearing unmistakable. "My mother deserves to be remembered." "All champions do, no matter which side of history they stand on. We do not erase the past, we build upon it." She turned to Ethan, her gaze gentle but firm. "Let us commission a new monument, one that honors Commander Lyra and every champion, crafted by Ethan himself." The crowd murmured, approval growing. Garrick hesitated, caught off guard. "You would entrust her legacy to a human?" Ethan stepped forward, voice steady. "I was her rival once. I carry the scars. If I honor her in stone, it will be with the truth, her strength, her pain, and her hope for what we could become." Silith nodded. "This is how we end the old war. Not with another contest of strength, but with creation. Let the monument stand as a promise. We remember, and we move forward, together." A silence settled, heavy with meaning. Garrick looked from Silith to Ethan, wrestling with pride and duty. At last, he bowed his head, forced to yield by the weight of her words and the will of the crowd. The tension broke, replaced by the hum of possibility. The final confrontation was set, not by combat, but by creation. As the parade resumed, Sylith slipped her hand into Ethan's. Orion laughed, his voice a note of hope. And so, in the heart of a city once divided, a new story began. Not of conquest, but of memory, unity, and love shaped by human hands. The day of the unveiling arrived, crisp and bright beneath a flawless blue sky. The plaza where Lyra had fallen was transformed. Sunlight glinting off polished flagstones, the air charged with the expectancy of history about to turn. Crowds pressed close, Zevran and human faces mingled, every voice hushed to a reverent murmur. At the front, Garrick and the traditionalists stood in somber formation, arms folded, eyes sharp and guarded. The monument loomed above, veiled in black, its shape both familiar and mysterious beneath the heavy cloth. Sylith stood at the dais, her ambassadorial robes pristine, her hair swept back in a warrior's knot. The crowd's murmur faded as she stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the plaza. My mother, Commander Lyra, was the heart of our people. She was unyielding in battle and uncompromising in her love for the Empire. She fought for Zevran honor, for tradition, for strength. Today, we remember not only her victories, but her struggles, her sacrifices, and her humanity. She paused, searching the sea of faces. The world she knew is not the world we live in now. She taught me that strength is not the same as rigidity, that the future belongs to those willing to build, not just to those who fight. A ripple moved through the crowd, some nodding, some unmoved, others simply waiting for what would come next. Ethan stood beside her, hands clasped before him. The veiled monument towered overhead, its bulk defiant against the sky. He glanced toward Garrick, who watched with a stony face, lips pressed in a hard line. Ethan felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but also a deep, abiding calm. This moment was no longer about victory or defeat. It was about truth. At Sylith's nod, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was quieter than hers, but every word carried. When I first came here, I was told that humans were too weak, too fractured to stand among you, that our ideals would only soften your strength. But I have learned, and I hope you have seen, that true strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the courage to heal, the wisdom to rebuild from what is broken. He reached for the cord and drew it down. The black veil slid away with a whisper, revealing the monument in full. Lyra was not cast as a conqueror, not the legendary general immortalized at her zenith. She knelt, armor fractured and head bowed, her face etched with both pain and acceptance. The breaks in her armor were not flaws, but fissures from which streams of pale stone rose, delicate and luminous. These streams curled upward, forming the shape of a second figure, neither wholly human nor Zevran, but an amalgam of both. This figure knelt behind Lyra, calm and supportive, hands resting gently on her shoulders, not in dominance, but in solidarity. The pale stone wove through the dark, binding the two forms together. Every broken place was made beautiful by the joining, every crack a place for light to enter. At the base, carved in both Zevran script and human letters, was a single line, Lyra, the foundation. Silence flooded the plaza. Faces that had come prepared for pride or outrage now reflected only awe, confusion, and the slow dawning of understanding. Ethan turned to face the crowd. This monument is not a trophy, he said. It is a promise. We honor Lyra not because she was unbreakable, but because she endured, because she allowed herself to change. We are here because of her. She is the foundation for everything we hope to build. He let the words settle, his gaze moving to Garrick. Let us not worship only the victories. Let us remember what it cost, and let that knowledge make us gentler. Let the broken places bind us together. Garrick's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might answer with challenge or contempt. But something in the monument's gaze, in the way Lyra's defeat was rendered noble and necessary, broke through his certainty. Garrick bowed his head, defeated not by violence but by truth, and withdrew from the dais. The traditionalists followed, silent, their resistance quietly undone. The crowd remained still for a moment longer. Then a wave of applause and quiet tears swept the plaza. The old wounds had not vanished, but something new had begun. A reckoning, a reconciliation built on the courage to face what had been lost. That night, Ethan's atelier was a sanctuary of shadows and gentle lamplight. Orion slept curled in his bed, a faint smile on his lips, while the city beyond glowed with celebration. Ethan stood by the window, Syleth beside him, their hands entwined as they watched the illuminated monument from afar. The streams of pale stone caught the moonlight, casting gentle arcs across the plaza below. Syleth leaned into Ethan's side, her voice low and reflective. I think she would have understood, in the end. My mother always saw farther than she let on. She knew that breaking is not always the end. Ethan's hand trembled in hers, not with fear, but with the enormity of what they had made. I spent so long believing that my touch could only destroy, that every act of creation was just a way to hide the things I'd broken. She turned to face him, her eyes luminous with love and pride. Look at what your hands have built, Ethan. They shaped a future, not just for us, but for all our people. He looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, gentle, and finally saw them as she did. He let her lift them to her cheek, the warmth of her skin grounding him, the thrum of her heart beneath his palms. They carry me, Syleth whispered, her voice as soft as a vow. They carry us. In that quiet, sacred space, surrounded by beauty born of pain and love, illuminated by the monument to what they had endured and overcome, Ethan finally understood what it meant to be whole. The broken places were not his shame. They were the reason he could hold her now, the reason they could stand together at the dawn of something new. Our story ends here. If you'd like to support us, you can use the super thanks button right under the video to leave a tip. It truly helps our team improve the quality of our work. We're grateful to each and every subscriber for being with us. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.